When her grace suggested that she would be pleased to help arrange marriages for his sons to the daughters of great southern lords, Lord Stark refused brusquely. "We keep the old gods in the north," he told the queen. "When my boys take a wife, they will wed before a heart tree, not in some southern sept." Alysanne Targaryen did not yield easily, however. The lords of the south honored the old gods as well as the new, she told Lord Alaric. Most every castle that she knew had a godswood as well as a sept. And there were still certain houses that had never accepted the seven, no more than the Northmen had, the Blackwoods in the Riverlands chief amongst them, and mayhaps as many as a dozen more. Even a lord as stern and flinty as Alaric Stark found himself helpless before Queen Alysanne's stubborn charm. He allowed that he would think on what she said, and raise the matter with his sons. The longer the queen stayed, the more Lord Alaric warmed to her, and in time Alysanne came to realize that not everything that was said of him was true. He was careful with his coin, but not niggardly. He was not humorless at all, though his humor had an edge to it, sharp as a knife. His sons and daughter and the people of Winterfell seemed to love him well enough. Once the initial frost had thawed, his lordship took the queen hunting after elk and wild boar in the Wolfswood, showed her the bones of a giant, and allowed her to rummage as she pleased through his modest castle library. He even deigned to approach Silverwing, though warily. The women of Winterfell were taken by the queen's charms as well. Once they grew to know her, her grace became particularly close with Lord Alaric's daughter, Alara. When the rest of the queen's party finally turned up at the castle gates, after struggling through trackless bogs and summer snows, the meat and mead flowed freely, despite the king's absence. Things were not going as well at King's Landing, meanwhile. The peace talks dragged on far longer than anticipated, for the acrimony between the two free cities ran deeper than Jaehaerys had known. When his grace attempted to strike a balance, both sides accused him of favoring the other. Whilst the prince and the archon dickered, fights began to break out between their men across the city, in inns, brothels, and wine sinks. A Pentoshi guardsman was set upon and killed, and 3 nights later the archon's own galley was set afire where she was docked. The king's departure was delayed and delayed again. In the north, Queen Alysanne grew restless with waiting, and decided to take her leave of Winterfell for a time and visit the men of the Night's Watch at Castle Black. The distance was not negligible, even flying. Her grace landed at the last hearth and several smaller keeps and holdfasts on her way, to the surprise and delight of their lords. Whilst a portion of her tail scrambled after her, the rest remained at Winterfell. Her first sight of the wall from above took Alysanne's breath away, her grace would later tell the king. There had been some concern how the queen might be received at Castle Black, for many of the Black brothers had been poor fellows and warriors' sons before those orders were abolished, but Lord Stark sent ravens ahead to warn of her coming, and the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, Lothor Burleigh, assembled 800 of his finest men to receive her. That night the Black brothers feasted the queen on mammoth meat, washed down with mead and stout. As dawn broke the next day Lord Burleigh took her grace to the top of the wall. "Here the world ends," he told her, gesturing at the vast green expanse of the haunted forest beyond. Burleigh was apologetic for the quality of the food and drink presented to the queen, and the rudeness of the accommodations at Castle Black. "We do what we can, Your Grace," the Lord Commander explained, "but our beds are hard, our halls are cold, and our food is nourishing," the queen finished. "And that is all that I require. It will please me to eat as you do." The men of the Night's Watch were as thunderstruck by the queen's dragon as the people of White Harbor had been, though the queen herself noted that Silverwing does not like this wall. Though it was summer and the wall was weeping, the chill of the ice could still be felt whenever the wind blew, and every gust would make the dragon hiss and snap. "Thrice I flew Silverwing high above Castle Black, and thrice I tried to take her north beyond the wall," Alysanne wrote to Jaehaerys, "but every time she veered back south again and refused to go. Never before has she refused to take me where I wished to go. One laughed about it when I came down again, so the Black brothers would not realize anything was amiss, but it troubled me then and it troubles me still." At Castle Black the queen saw her first wildlings. A raiding party had been taken not long before trying to scale the wall, and a dozen ragged survivors of the fight had been confined in cages for her inspection. When her grace asked what was to be done with them, she was told that they would have their ears cut off before being turned loose north of the wall. "All but those 3, her escorts said, pointing out 3 prisoners who had already lost their ears. "We'll take the heads off those 3. They've been caught once already. If the others were wise, he told the queen, they would take the loss of their ears as a lesson and keep to their side of the wall. Most don't, though, he added. 3 of the brothers had been singers before taking the black, and they took turns playing for her grace at night, regaling her with ballads, war songs, and bawdy barracks tunes. Lord Commander Burleigh himself took the queen into the haunted forest with 100 rangers riding escort. When Alysanne expressed the wish to see some of the other forts along the wall, the first ranger Benton Glover led her west atop the wall, past Snowgate to the Night Fort, where they made their descent and spent the night. The ride, the queen decided, was as breathtaking a journey as she had ever experienced, as exhilarating as it was cold, though the wind up there blows so strongly that I feared it was about to sweep us off the wall. The Night Fort itself she found grim and sinister. It is so huge the men seem dwarfed by it, like mice in a ruined hall, she told Jaehaerys, and there is a darkness there, a taste in the air. I was so glad to leave that place. It must not be thought that the Queen's days and nights at Castle Black were entirely taken up with such idle pursuits. She was here for the Iron Throne, she reminded Lord Burleigh, and many an afternoon was spent with him and his officers discussing the wildlings, the wall, and the needs of the watch. Above all else, a queen must know how to listen, Alysanne Targaryen often said. At Castle Black, she proved those words. She listened, she heard, and she won the eternal devotion of the men of the Night's Watch by her actions. She understood the need for a castle between Snowgate and Icemark, she told Lord Burleigh, but the Night Fort was crumbling, overlarge, and surely ruinous to heat. The Watch should abandon it, she said, and build a smaller castle farther to the east. Lord Burleigh could not disagree. But the Night's Watch lacked the coin to build new castles, he said. Alysanne had anticipated that objection. She would pay for the castle herself, she told the Lord Commander, and pledged her jewels to cover the cost. I have a good many jewels, she said. It would take 8 years to raise the new castle, which would bear the name of Deep Lake. Outside its main hall, a statue of Alysanne Targaryen stands to this very day. The Night Fort was abandoned even before Deep Lake was completed, as the Queen had wished. Lord Commander Burleigh also renamed Snowgate Castle in her honor, as Queensgate. Queen Alysanne also wished to listen to the women of the north. When Lord Burleigh explained that there were no women on the wall, she persisted, until finally, with great reluctance, he had her escorted to a village south of the wall that the Black Brothers called Mole's Town. She would find women there, his lordship said, though most of them would be harlots. The men of the Night's Watch took no wives, he explained, but they remained men all the same, and some felt certain needs. Queen Alysanne said she did not care, and so it came to pass that she held her women's court amongst the whores and strumpets of Mole's Town. And there heard certain tales that would change the 7 kingdoms forever. Back in King's Landing, the Archon of Tyrosh, the Prince of Pentos, and Jaehaerys I Targaryen of Westeros finally put their seals to a treaty of eternal peace. That a pact was reached at all was considered somewhat of a miracle, and largely due to the king's veiled hint that Westeros itself might enter the war if an accord was not reached. The aftermath would prove even less successful than the negotiations. On his return to Tyrosh, the Archon was heard to say that King's Landing was a reeking sore, not fit to be called a city, whilst the magisters of Pentos were so unhappy with the terms that they sacrificed their prince to their queer gods, as is the custom of that city. Only then was King Jaehaerys free to fly north with Vermithor. He and the Queen reunited at Winterfell, after half a year apart. The king's time at Winterfell began on an ominous note. Upon his arrival, Alaric Stark led his grace down to the crypts below the castle to show him his brother's tomb. Walton lies down here in darkness in no small part thanks to you. Stars and swords, the leavings of your 7 gods, what are they to us? And yet you sent them to the wall in their hundreds and their thousands, so many that the Night's Watch was hard-pressed to feed them. And when the worst of them rose up, the oathbreakers you had sent us, it cost my brother's life to put them down. A grievous price, the king agreed, but that was never our intent. You have my regrets, my lord, and my gratitude. Would sooner have my brother, Lord Alaric answered darkly. Lord Stark and King Jaehaerys would never be fast friends, the shade of Walton Stark remained between them to the end. It was only through Queen Alysanne's good offices that they ever found accord. The Queen had visited Brandon's gift, the lands south of the wall that Brandon the Builder had granted to the Watch for their support and sustenance. It is not enough, she told the king. The soil is thin and stony, the hills unpopulated. The watch lacks for coin, and when winter comes they will lack for food as well. The answer she proposed was a new gift, a further strip of land south of Brandon's gift. The notion did not please Lord Alaric. Though a strong friend to the Night's Watch, he knew that the lords who presently held the lands in question would object to them being given away without their leave. I have no doubt that you can persuade them, Lord Alaric, the Queen said. And finally, charmed by her as ever, Alaric Stark agreed that, he could. And so it came to pass that the size of the gift was doubled with a stroke. Little more need be said of the time Queen Alysanne and King Jaehaerys spent in the north. After lingering in Winterfell for another fortnight, they made their way to Torrens Square and thence to Barrowton, where Lord Dustin showed them the barrow of the first king and staged somewhat of a tourney in their honor, though it was a poor thing compared to the tourneys of the south. From there Vermithor and Silverwing bore Jaehaerys and Alysanne back again to King's Landing. The men and women of their retinue had a more arduous journey home, traveling overland from Barrowton back to White Harbor and taking ship from there. Even before the others reached White Harbor, King Jaehaerys had called together his council in the Red Keep, to consider an entreaty from his queen. When Septon Barth, Grand Maester Benefer, and the others had assembled, Alysanne told them of her visit to the Wall, and the day that she had spent with the whores and fallen women of Mole's Town. There was a girl there, the queen said, no older than I am as I sit before you now. A pretty girl, but not, I think, as pretty as she was. Her father was a blacksmith, and when she was a maid of 14 years, he gave her hand in marriage to his apprentice. She was fond of the boy, and he of her, so the two of them were duly wed. But scarcely had they said their vows than their lord came down upon the wedding with his men at arms to claim his right to her first night. He carried her off to his tower and enjoyed her, and the next morning his men returned her to her husband. But her maidenhead was gone, together with whatever love the apprentice boy had borne her. He could not raise his hand against the Lord for peril of his life, so instead he raised it against his wife. When it became plain that she was carrying the Lord's child, he beat it out of her. From that day on, he never called her anything but whore, until finally the girl decided that if she must be called a whore she would live as one, and made her way to Mole's Town. There she dwells until this day, a sad child, ruined. But all the while, in other villages, other maids are being wed, and other lords are claiming their first night. Hers was the worst story, but not the only one. At White Harbor, at Mole's Town, at Barrowton, other women spoke of their first nights as well. I never knew, my lords. Oh, I knew of the tradition. Even on Dragonstone, there are stories of men of mine own house, Targaryens, who have made free with the wives of fisherfolk and serving men, and sired children on them. Dragonseeds, they call them, Jaehaerys said with obvious reluctance. It is not a thing to boast of, but it has happened, mayhaps more often than we would care to admit. Such children are cherished, though. Orys Baratheon himself was a dragonseed, a bastard brother to our grandsire. Whether he was conceived of a first night I cannot say, but Lord Aerion was his father, that was well known. Gifts were given. Gifts. The queen said in a voice sharp with derision. I see no honor in any of this. I knew such things happened hundreds of years ago, I confess it, but I never dreamed that the custom endured so strongly to this day. Mayhaps I did not want to know. I closed my eyes, but that poor girl in Mole's Town opened them. The right of the first night. Your Grace, my lords, it is time we put an end to this. I beg you. A silence fell after the queen had finished speaking. Grand Maester Benefer tells us. The lords of the small council shifted awkwardly in their seats and exchanged glances, until finally the king himself spoke up, sympathetic but reluctant. What the queen proposed would be difficult, Jaehaerys said. Lords grew troublesome when kings began taking things that they regarded as their own. Their lands, their gold, their rights, their wives. Alysanne finished. I remember our wedding, my lord. If you had been a blacksmith and me a washerwoman and some lord had come to claim me and take my maidenhead the day we took our vows, what would you have done? Killed him, Jaehaerys said, but I am not a blacksmith. If, one said, the queen persisted. A blacksmith is still a man, is he not? What man but a coward would stand by meekly whilst another man has his way with his wife? We do not want blacksmiths killing lords, surely. She turned to Grand Maester Benefer and said, I know how Gargan Jaehaerys died. Gargan the guest. How many more such instances have there been, I wonder? More than I would care to say, Benefer allowed. They are not oft spoken of, for fear that other men might do the same, but the first night is an offense against the king's peace, the queen concluded. An offense against not only the maid, but her husband as well. And the wife of the Lord, never forget. What did those high-born ladies do whilst their lords are out deflowering maidens? Did they so sing, pray? Were it me, I might pray my lord husband fell off his horse and broke his neck coming home. King Jaehaerys smiled at that, but it was plain that he was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. The right of the first night is an ancient one, he argued, though with no great passion, as much a part of lordship as the right of pit and gallows. It is rarely used south of the neck, I am told, but its continued existence is a lordly prerogative that some of my more truculent subjects would be loath to surrender. You are not wrong, my love, but sometimes it is best to let a sleeping dragon lie. We are the sleeping dragons, the queen threw back. These lords who love their first nights are dogs. Why must they slake their lust on maidens who have only just pledged their love to other men? Have they no wives of their own? Are there no whores in their domains? Have they lost the use of their hands? The Justiciar Lord Alban Massey spoke up then, saying, there is more to the first night than lust, your grace. The practice is an ancient one, older than the Andals, older than the faith. It goes back to the Dawn Age, I do not doubt. The first men were a savage race, and like the Wildings beyond the wall, they followed only strength. Their lords and kings were warriors, mighty men and heroes, and they wanted their sons to be the same. If a warlord chose to bestow his seed upon some maid on her wedding night, it was seen as a sort of blessing. And if a child should come of the coupling, so much the better. The husband could then claim the honor of raising a hero's son as his own. Mayhaps that was so, 10,000 years ago, the queen replied, but the lords claiming the first night now are no heroes. You have not heard the women speak of them. I have. Old men, fat men, cruel men, poxy boys, rapers, droolers, men covered with scabs, with scars, with boils, lords who have not washed in half a year, men with greasy hair and lice. These are your mighty men. I listened to the girls, and none of them felt blessed. The Andals never practiced the first night in Andalos, Grand Maester Benefer said. When they came to Westeros and swept away the kingdoms of the first men, they found the tradition in place and chose to let it remain, just as they did the Godswoods. Septon Barth spoke then, turning to the king. Sire, if I may be so bold, I believe her grace has the right of this. The first men might have found some purpose in this right, but the first men fought with bronze swords and fed their weirwood trees with blood. We are not those men, and it is past time we put an end to this evil. It stands against every ideal of chivalry. Our knights swear to protect the innocence of maidens, save for when the lord they serve wishes to despoil one, it would seem. We swear our marriage vows before the father and the mother, promising fidelity until the stranger comes to part us, and nowhere in the seven-pointed star does it say that those promises do not apply to lords. You are not wrong, your grace, some lords will surely grumble at this, especially in the north. But all the maids will thank us for it, and all the husbands and the fathers and the mothers, just as the queen has said. I know the faithful will be pleased. His High Holiness will let his voice be heard, never doubt it. When Barth had finished speaking, Jaehaerys Targaryen threw up his hands. I know when I am beaten. Very well. Let it be done. And so it came to pass that the second of what the smallfolk named Queen Alysanne's laws was enacted, the abolition of the Lord's ancient right to the first night. Henceforth, it was decreed, a bride's maidenhead would belong only to her husband, whether joined before a septon or a heart tree, and any man, be he lord or peasant, who took her on her wedding night or any other night would be guilty of the crime of rape. As the 58th year after Aegon's conquest drew to a close, King Jaehaerys celebrated the 10th anniversary of his coronation at the starry sept of Aldtown. The callow boy that the High Septon had crowned that day was long gone, his place had been taken by a man of 24 who was every inch a king. The wispy beard and mustache that his grace had cultivated early in his reign had become a handsome golden beard, shot through with silver. His unshorn hair he wore in a thick braid that fell almost to his waist. Tall and handsome, Jaehaerys moved with an easy grace, be it on the dance floor or in the training yard. His smile, it was said, could warm the heart of any maiden in the Seven Kingdoms, his frown could make a man's blood run cold. In his sister he had a queen even more beloved than he was. Good Queen Alysanne, the small folk called her, from Aldtown to the Wall. The gods had blessed the two of them with 3 strong children, 2 splendid young princes and a princess who was the darling of the realm. In their decade of rule, they had known grief and horror, betrayal and conflict, and the death of loved ones, but they had weathered the storms and survived the tragedies and emerged stronger and better from all they had endured. Their accomplishments were undeniable. The 7 kingdoms were at peace, and more prosperous than they had been in living memory. It was a time for celebration, and celebrate they did, with a tourney at King's Landing on the anniversary of the king's coronation. Princess Daenerys and the princes Aemon and Balon shared the royal box with their mother and father, and reveled in the cheers of the crowd. On the field, the highlight of the competition was the brilliance of Sir Ryam Redwyn, the youngest son of Lord Manfred Redwyn of the Arbor, Jaehaerys' Lord Admiral and Master of Ships. In successive tilts, Sir Ryam enhorsed Ronald Baratheon, Arthur Oakhart, Simon Dondarrion, Harry's Hog, Harry the Ham, to the Commons, and 2 Kingsguard knights, Lawrence Roxton and Lucamore Strong. When the young gallant trotted up to the royal box and crowned good Queen Alysanne as his Queen of Love and Beauty, the Commons roared their approval. The leaves in the trees had begun to turn russet and orange and gold, and the ladies of the court wore gowns to match. At the feast that followed the end of the tourney, Lord Rhaegar Baratheon appeared with his children, Boromund and Jocelyn, to be warmly embraced by the king and queen. Lords from all over the realm came to join the celebration: Lyman Lannister from Castle Rock, Daemon Valerion from Driftmark, Prentice Tully from Riverrun, Roderick Arryn from the Vale, even the Lords Rowan and Oakhart, whose levies once marched with Sept and Moon. Theomore Manderley came down from the north. Alaric Stark did not, but his sons came, and with them his daughter
Alara, blushing, to take up her new duties as a lady-in-waiting to the queen. The High Septon was too ill to come, but he sent his newest septa, Rhaella, who had been Targaryen, still shy, but smiling. It was said that the queen wept for joy at the sight of her, for in her face and form she was the very image of her sister, Arya, grown older. It was a time for warm embraces, for smiles, for toasts and reconciliations, for renewing old friendships and making new ones, for laughter and kisses. It was a good time, a golden autumn, a time of peace and plenty. But winter was coming.